Is it normal to feel bored in your marriage even when nothing's technically wrong? What do you do when your spouse gets defensive, even though you're trying to bring things up calmly and respectfully? How do you reconnect after you and your spouse have been through a really difficult time, one that created a wedge between the two of you? If any of those questions resonate with you, today's episode is for you because today we're talking about things that a lot of couples wonder about privately, but they don't always know how to talk about out loud with each other. Welcome back to the High Ticket Woman. I'm Debbie Caudle. Today's episode is another Q&A, and as always, these questions come from very real places, places of confusion, guilt, frustration, and as I've said already, a lot of just quiet wondering as opposed to things we're talking about out loud. So as you listen, I want you to do two things. First, I want you to notice which of these questions is really speaking to me. And you're thinking, yeah, I've never said that out loud, but that's exactly what I'm going through. And second, I wonder if Debbie could answer something about my relationship. And the answer is absolutely. If you have a relationship question that you want me to address in a future Q&A, please email me at debbie@debbiecaudle.com. That's debbie@debbiecaudle.com. Caudle spelled Caudle. I promise you I read every message. Okay, so let's dive into today's questions. So question number 1, is it normal to feel bored in marriage? This question comes from someone who says, I love my spouse. There's no big conflict, but sometimes I feel bored and I feel guilty even saying that out loud. Is this normal? Is boredom normal in marriage or does it mean something is really wrong with us? Great question. Because you know what? Boredom in marriage is actually far more common than maybe people admit. Because it's not like we're going around asking people, "Are you bored with your spouse?" I am. Are you? We don't do that, do we? So let's normalize it. Boredom doesn't mean your marriage is in trouble, broken, that you're headed for divorce. No, what it actually means is that familiarity has crept into your marriage. Remember the days when you were dating and everything was so new and exciting and, filled with passion and energy, and you're hanging on every word of what your girlfriend or boyfriend was saying, and you just loved being with them? Well, after years of being together, kinda can start to feel flat if you aren't being really, really intentional in your relationship. Everything, early in relationships, everything is new, right? You're discovering each other. You're curious. You're super attentive. But then life settles in and routines form and responsibilities pile up. And it's easy for marriage to start feeling functional. Okay? And that's when boredom creeps in. It's not because we don't love each other anymore. It's because you stop being intentional about creating and finding ways to still be exciting, be passionate, be unique and spontaneous and impulsive. So the deeper issue underneath boredom is it's it's not about wanting something or someone else. It's about something being missing between you guys, okay? So I want you to think about what your conversation is like these days with your spouse. If you're bored, it's probably that your conversation has become very transactional. You know what I mean. It's about the bills that have to be paid and the tasks that have to be, the car needs the oil change and groceries need to be bought and who's doing what and the kids need to be picked up at school and taken to their, different events and yada yada yada, right? And if that's all you're talking about, then you're not talking about each other. You're not talking about the relationship and what it needs. And there's so much pulling us from different directions that our time together as a couple begins to feel really distracted. We as a couple start to we're at the bottom of all the priorities. And so the joy and the fun and the excitement that we used to feel has been replaced by everything else and by being just really efficient. We gotta maximize our time. We gotta go here. We gotta do that. And then there's just no time to just stop and chill and be us. And so instead of actually addressing that as the real issue, instead of saying, I miss us, I miss you, instead we say, I'm bored. Okay. So I want you to ask yourself, if this is an issue in your marriage, I want you to ask yourself, when did you and your spouse stop choosing each other on purpose? You know what I mean when I'm asking that. When did everything else become more important? Your job, that kid, your responsibilities at church, your friends, your self-care. When did all of that become a bigger priority than your marriage? When did finding time with your spouse become optional instead of something that you had really strict boundaries around? You were protecting. So feeling bored doesn't mean you failed. It just means you gotta pay attention. If you're sitting there thinking, "Oh man, this is me and my marriage. I miss what we used to have, but I don't know how to say that without sounding critical to my spouse." Well, keep listening, okay? Because the goal here is not for you to diagnose the problem and then go to yourself and say, "Okay, we've got a problem and we need to fix this." You're not gonna do that in one conversation. It's not gonna happen, okay? What you wanna do instead is you wanna open the door to begin talking about this with your spouse. I think one of the most common mistakes that people make is they start focusing on what's wrong instead of what matters, what's wrong or what's missing. So instead of saying, "Hey, you know, I've been missing you a lot lately. I miss how close we used to feel. I've been thinking about some ways that we can connect again because I want us to get back to that." Instead of starting with that, instead we often say things like, "We don't talk anymore. You don't make time for us. We we we're, we're just roommates living under the same roof. Our marriage isn't what it used to be." Right. So it sounds critical. It sounds judgmental, and you're going to get a defensive response. But if you start with, "Hey, this is what I'm longing for. This is what really matters to me," then you're inviting a conversation that's about closeness. That's the cue here, okay? Lead with what you really want, especially after a rough season, which we're gonna get to in the 3rd question. It's really it's really key that we don't point fingers at our spouse, okay? We don't want it to be this you versus me. It's an us versus whatever we've been going through, and every marriage faces difficult seasons, so being honest about we've grown apart and I want us to get back to that closeness that we once have is really key. Just think about some gentle ways to bring this up. What helps you feel close to me? What would I be doing differently that would help you feel more connected to me? What that you're missing about us that we don't do anymore? These questions are invitations, and your spouse isn't gonna feel like that deer in the headlights, like, "Oh, I'm in trouble." We wanna avoid that, and remember, you're not gonna necessarily get an immediate answer. What you're doing here is you're planting a seed that gets watered over multiple conversations. Work into small steps, not this giant overhaul of your whole marriage, because that's not how reconnection happens, okay? So we want to leave lots of room for conversation to be ongoing. Okay, try that. Let's see what happens. Reach out to me if you got a part two to this. All right, let's move on to question 2. Why does my spouse get defensive when I bring things up calmly? Great question. I'm really glad this question is being asked because this is I think this is a really, really common problem. Okay. So this person says, "I'm not yelling, I'm not attacking, I'm calm. but every time I bring up something that matters to me, my spouse gets defensive. Why? Why is this happening? Well, here's the key thing that you need to understand. Defensiveness isn't always about the words that you're saying or how you're saying it. It's about what they hear. So you can be calm, but if your spouse hears criticism, if they interpret your words to mean that they are failing or that you are disappointed in them or that they aren't enough, then their nervous system is going to kick in. It's going to react before the front of their brain kicks in, the front of the brain where the rational thought and reasoning kicks in, right? So that's why you get that initial defensive, like backed into the corner kind of response, okay? Because they tied their worth to their performance. And now when you're trying to give them feedback, even if it's delivered in a really calm, gentle way, all they hear is, "I'm doing something wrong." And so what happens? They go into self-protective mode, which means they're defending themselves or they're deflecting it back on you. "Well, you do that too. I'm not the only one who does that." Or they minimize the problem. "It's not that big a deal. You're overreacting." Or they shut down. And it's not because they don't care, it's because that's what feels safer to them than really sitting and fearing and owning what you say. So here's something that can help, okay? Before you actually address the issue, state what you're really intending. So that might sound like, "Hey, I really don't want this to come across as a criticism. What I really want is for us to go closer. I'm bringing this up so that we can feel closer together." Or this isn't about you being wrong or doing something wrong. This is about us working together better or im you know, feeling more connected together. Now, that doesn't guarantee they won't get defensive, but it does help reduce the possibility of that. But I think a key thing that's really important for you to realize is that if you're married to somebody who really gets really defensive easily, and I recognize this in my own marriage because, Jeff and I are both remarried. Jeff was married 26 years before me. I was married almost 24 years. So, you bring an X amount of baggage into the marriage, right? So when you've got unresolved shame, stress, insecurities, hurt, betrayal, even calm communication can feel triggering. It can feel heavy. It can activate that nervous system pretty quickly. So again, it's not as much about how you deliver the words. It's about really focusing to create the emotional safety that helps your spouse over time. So Debbie loves me. Debbie is coming from the best possible place. The words that she said might have sort of made me really it might have taken me back to my previous relationship, but I know that Debbie is a different person, and I need to just sit and listen and hear what she has to say. Okay, so that doesn't happen in one conversation, that happens over time. Lots of repetition of saying, "Hey, I love you. This isn't meant to hurt your feelings or accuse you of anything. This is me just wanting us to improve some aspect of our marriage, and I know that I have ownership in that too." Let's try that. Now let's pause here for just a minute because these are really common marital issues, right? So you're probably listening and thinking, yeah, this sounds like my marriage. We're stuck in these patterns and I don't know how to break them." And if you're saying to yourself, "I've tried all these things, it doesn't work." Okay, maybe. But, this is exactly the kind of work that we do inside of Marriage in Bloom, and it's a whole lot easier to go into greater depth when I know exactly what the problems in your marriage are, and I understand what has caused and created those problems. So, while I'm giving very generic feedback to you right now, it's going to take something far more intense to really if you've got very pervasive patterns, it's gonna take something far more intense and high touch to really address those patterns, especially if there's a chronic nature to them. So reach out to me, debbiecaudle.com/marriage in bloom, because I want you to realize that no matter how many years you've been married, these patterns can be broken. If you are willing to really do the work, not point fingers at your spouse, but really turn that around and go, I know I've got things I need to work on. I know there are changes that I can make, and this marriage matters enough for me to do that, then reach out to me. It's a 45 to 60-minute free call where we talk about where you're at, how you got there, and what the next steps are. So give me reach out to me. Okay. All right, let's move on to the third and final question. And this is similar to the first one, but a little bit different. Okay, how do couples reconnect after a rough season? So we've been through something really difficult and it's driven a wedge between us. Things are calmer now, but we don't feel close. How do we change that? Oh, okay. So here's another question about connection. And you can see that this is such a common problem in marriage. People struggle to feel connected because there's so many things externally that are happening that beat down on a marriage. Metaphorically, the storms of life really wear on a couple. And so here's something really important for you to understand. Reconnection, it doesn't happen automatically. Just because the storm is over, whatever you've gone through that was really, really hard, it doesn't mean like you just bounce back. Doesn't work that way. And I'm really, really glad that you realize that just because things are calm between you now doesn't mean that you feel close to each other. That's a mistake a lot of couples make, that the absence of conflict means we're healed. No, it doesn't. I know there are couples out there who take pride in the fact that they hardly ever fight, so that must mean they're okay. Nah, not so. Really, really healthy couples do argue, they do fight. It's how they fight that matters, okay? Not the absence of conflict. Okay, so what's really happening when you're not fighting anymore is that you're both emotionally tired. Whatever you weathered, it was really hard. It wore you down, and you just don't feel like fighting anymore. You stop pushing and pulling at each other. You stop bringing things up. It doesn't feel safe. It doesn't, it feels too vulnerable. So you're not talking about those things. So yeah, things have calmed down. Things feel quieter between the two of you, but potentially they also feel emptier. Okay. And so you go into what I call relief mode. You're relieved that you're not fighting. There's less tension. You're relieved that there isn't the same volatility. And but now you don't want to rock the boat. So what do? You avoid. You avoid talking about the hard stuff. And over time, all those things you're not saying, that's what creates that emotional distance between the two of you. So what's missing after that hard season isn't love. You still love each other most of the time. It's repair. That's what's missing. And by repair, I mean you got to acknowledge what what it cost you to go through whatever that was, whatever that issue, that storm that you faced in your marriage, what it cost you, how it changed you, the things that didn't get said, the hurts that it caused, the misunderstandings that it created, and what needs rebuilding. And that can feel really risky, especially if you're afraid of reopening old wounds. So what do you do? Well, what you gotta stop pretending it didn't happen, for the starters, right? So somebody has to be willing to start the conversation, and you do that by saying something like, "We haven't ever really talked about how hard that was for us," or something like, "Man, we got through that, we survived it, but it it changed us, and it doesn't feel like we've really found our way back to each other yet. That's honest. And you notice with both of those statements that you're not blaming anybody, you're just being real, okay? Because there's this emotional residue left over, and you gotta be able to call it out. You gotta be able to say, "This exists between us. We can't just not talk about it." And the other thing you have to do is you have to adjust your expectations of what getting back to who you guys were, what that actually looks like, okay? It's not gonna happen immediately. You can't just say, "Well, we talked, we apologized. Why don't we feel close yet?" Well, because it's not just a switch that you can turn on. It's a process, especially after there's been hurt or betrayal or trust has been broken. It's the consistency, not the intensity of the conversation. It's the showing up over and over and over, following through on things that you say you're gonna do, being emotionally present even if it feels awkward. That's how you rebuild that safety, and you do that before you try to rebuild passion, men. You can't rush intimacy. You can't expect it to come back overnight. You have to earn it through reliability. Okay, so you start with being emotionally present. And this I think is also for men especially, you 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 can't fix things quickly. After a really, really difficult time in your marriage, don't start with solutions. You gotta just sit and listen to your wife. I'm speaking about typical gender problems here, okay? A lot of times women carry a lot of emotional hurt that they've tried to address before in a marriage, and they haven't felt heard, and so now they're not talking about it anymore, and it's so typical for the husband to go, "Well, okay then, problem solved." He's not getting upset about it. No, not true. So, if you wanna reconnect, you've gotta start with emotional presence, not problem solving. That means you've gotta check in emotionally with your spouse without immediately jumping to, "Well, let's do this or let's do that." You gotta be able to listen to each other without correcting or criticizing. You gotta be curious about what's going on with your spouse, which means asking lots of questions and not making assumptions. After so many years of marriage, it's very easy for us to make assumptions. We look back at the past, we look over our shoulder and go, "Well, this is what you did before, this is what you meant before, this is what you said before, therefore, I don't need to ask. I know what you think, feel, and what you're gonna do." And that's the kiss of death to reconnection. Great. Stop assuming. And I think sometimes the most reconnecting thing that you can say to your spouse is, "I'm here. I know we've gone through something really difficult, but I'm not going anywhere." Okay. Now, another thing that I think is really key when you've gone through something really, really difficult is to stop trying to get back to what you were and start trying to build something new. Okay. We can often grieve the old version of our marriage that we used to have and want things to be the way they used to be. But sometimes we can't do that. We can't go backward. But you have to focus on building something new. All right? 'Cause whatever you've gone through, it's changed you. You have to build based on what you now know about each other. You have to factor in the new information and create new rhythms and new boundaries and new ways of communications and new expectations for yourself and for each other and for the marriage. So I might just start with saying, "Hey, we're not the same as we were. This thing, it changed us, and that's okay. Let's figure out who we are now." Okay? It takes time to heal. It takes time. So be patient. Be patient with yourself. Be patient with each other. Slowness doesn't mean that something's wrong. It doesn't mean that you're not going to make it. It doesn't mean that it's too late. It means that you're both being careful, and that's not a bad thing. So as we wrap up today, I want to remind you, you know, Most marriage struggles are marriage struggles, and most of them are not signs of failure. They're just signs of unmet needs and unspoken fears, so many fears, and patterns that may have even existed within each of us long before we were married to this person, and that we've never been taught how to see or navigate. And if you want help with that, you can get help. You aren't you don't have to stay stuck in these patterns. Re reach out from reach out to me. Whether that's leaving me a question with my email, debbie@debbiecaudle.com to be answered on the podcast here, or, you know, actually wanting help with your marriage through Marriage and Bloom. Debbie oh, no, that's my email. Uh, debbiecaudle.com/marriage and bloom. Okay, either one. Okay, you can start with just having your questions answered generically, or you can say, "No, I really need to sit down with Debbie, the 2 of us, or the 3 of us, you and your spouse and me, and I really wanna talk with her about, how can we change this in our own marriage?" And I'm happy to do that. Like I said, it's a 45-minute to 60-minute call. That's a lot of time that I spend with you to really help figure out where you're at. So, as always, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be teachable. Thanks for joining me today.